thank you, and it's very good to be here. I'm going to try and explain as simply as I can some of what is often a hidden history of the First World War. The First World War is often presented, if you look at what's said on the news, on television, as a little bit of a mystery. Sometimes it's a great calamity, millions of people lost their lives, but it's not clear why or exactly what happened, what took place, what caused it, and also often what was going on in it, and also the fact that there was massive opposition to it, especially by the working people of many countries, including Britain. So I'm going to try and say something about that. I've prepared a few pictures to see you've got something to look at other than me, so I hope that those are useful. The first point I wanted to make, I think, has already been made, perhaps by Layla, and also in some of the slides that we saw, which was that we call it the First World War. It was a world war in which people from every continent participated, gave their lives, both combatants, military people, essentially men largely, but also a massive civilian population as well. And so this first picture is just of some African troops who were mobilized, in fact often conscripted into war service. I think if we go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so I again wanted to present some of the statistics of the war. It's often difficult to get exact statistics, but overall statistics look something like this. Roughly 40 million total casualties. That's casualties, not deaths. Of those, somewhere between 15 to 19 million total deaths, about 8 million civilian deaths, something like 23 million wounded. And as you can see there, if you just look at Britain, like 750,000 deaths and 1.5 million disabled, British disabled servicemen. But then we also have to remember that this conflict, as I've already indicated, included not just those based in Europe, in Britain, France, Germany, and so on, but also the massive colonial empires that the big powers such as Britain had. And so immediately Britain, France, Germany, and others declared war. That also involved millions of people in the colonial empires. And as you can see there, it involved about 4 million people. From the colonial empires, the conflict was waged also in other parts of the world, in Africa, in Asia, in what today we call the Middle East, Western Asia, we can say. And I've only indicated some of these deaths and some of the numbers of those who were conscripted, just to give you an idea. Something like, if we just look at, there's nothing I put it up, if we just look at the numbers of troops, numbers of African troops that the French Empire recruited, something like 500,000 African troops, another 120,000 Baltic. The way that the war was often fought in Africa, there were tens of thousands, or literally hundreds of thousands of Africans who were conscripted as porters into the armies of Britain, France, and other countries. Some indications of deaths, well, I just had there the British colonies in East Africa, about 40,000. Total deaths in East and Central Africa, about 370,000. And then total deaths in East Africa from the war and the consequences of the war, which included a global flu pandemic, something like 1 million people. Yes, the consequences of the war were immense, not only in terms of deaths, wounding, casualties, the millions of people who were involved, but also the fact that the war completely transformed the world. And at that time there were 4 major empires. All of those 4 empires collapsed as a result of the war. The Russian Empire, of course, was brought to collapse both by the consequences of the war and by the revolutionary activities of the Russian people, which overthrew the Tsar, as you are aware. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was an enormous empire, not only combining those 2 countries, but which dominated the whole Balkan region as well, also collapsed as a result of the war. The German Empire, not just in Europe, but also in Africa, also collapsed as a result. And then lastly, the Ottoman Empire that had stretched throughout Europe, parts of Asia, and also parts of Africa, also came to an end, in fact died as a result of this global war. So it's, anyway, a tremendously significant event in the history of the world. But we're often misled about the nature of the war. All kinds of disinformation is presented, and I'm just indicating just a couple of headlines. These are actually from the events commemorating the beginning of the war in 2014. So you'll see the first two from Boris Johnson. These are literally just copied from the newspaper. So the first one is about the cause of the war, you could say. And Boris Johnson was very much of the mind that, well, okay, we don't want to be too hard on the Germans, but in fact, well, it's all their fault. Germany started the war. Then the other one from Michael Gove, along the same lines, but again criticising the well-known TV program Blackadder, which presents a critical view, shall we say, of the conduct of the war from the point of view of the British military, which dominant. And so he's claiming that these are all kind of left-wing myths and so on. And again, putting the blame on the German government. What I should also say is that one thing which is often presented about the war is, as I said at the beginning, is that it's kind of mysterious. It's presented that it was a catastrophe, an accident, but the causes of it are unknown. It's just some terrible thing which happened, and we should remember how terrible it was and that people gave their lives and so on. Or it's sometimes said that it was a war to uphold Western civilization, or that it's something to do with upholding Belgian neutrality and so on. Without explaining anything about this. In fact, if you look at the history of Belgium, Belgium was also a major colonial power and had been responsible for the deaths of some 10 million Africans in the 30 years before the war. But nobody, of those from the powers that be, no one's concerned about the deaths of 10 million Africans, or how Belgium was upholding the neutrality of Africans, or upholding Western civilization in Africa. So all of these things are presented. In fact, I think in 1914, one of these politicians even said the war was a war against war, and a war against imperialism, and it should be kind of commemorated for that reason. So this is all disinformation about the nature of the war, the causes of the war, and you could say it's designed to, in a way, to disarm us today about what this war was about, and often what wars in general are about. So we go to the next slide. So I just wanted to use this example, this illustration. This is a map of Africa on the eve of the war. And what you will notice about it is it's completely divided between the European powers. So the big powers in Europe, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal and others have completely invaded African continent. They've divided it up between them. And they continue to fight over it. And if we look at the build-up to the war, we find several significant incidents in Africa, which I'll go on to speak a bit more about in a moment. But the key thing that it illustrates is that the world was divided between the big powers, who continued to contend against each other for more territory, for more raw materials, for more markets for their goods. But since the world, and Africa in particular, were already divided, how is that redivision going to be made? And in fact, that redivision could only be made by going to war. And in the build-up to the war, as I mentioned, there were various incidents and agreements between the big powers. To go on to the next slide, as I've mentioned some of them here. So far from the war being an accident, we can see it arising out of this contention between the big powers. So I've mentioned some of these things here. Many of these agreements were secret agreements. Some weren't, but many of them were. So for example, in 1904, there's an agreement between Britain and France over Morocco. So basically, Britain and France agreed that, yeah, France is going to have a free hand to do what he likes in Morocco. This is obviously not consulting anybody in Morocco. They're not consulting any Africans in Morocco. This is an agreement between Britain and France. France can have Morocco. The French said, okay, well, that's fine, because Britain can have Egypt, and we won't interfere there. But this agreement is directed against Germany, because Germany was also interested in Morocco at that particular time. And so Britain's alliance with France over Morocco led to, or contributed to, this, what is called the 1911 Agadir incident, where Germany threatened to intervene, warships were mobilized and so on, and it almost led to war at that time in 1911. Then we had, well, I've given the example there in 1905, these secret military maneuvers that Britain conducted with France. Again, they were already directed against Germany. In the years immediately preceding the war, Britain and other powers, but I've particularly emphasised Britain here, there was a massive expansion of the British Navy. Some of you remember when you were at school talking about dreadnoughts and all this kind of thing. So this expansion of the Navy was being directed against Germany. So war preparations were being made a decade before the war broke out. In 1912, the secret naval agreement. In 1907, a British alliance with Russia over the division of Central Asia, particularly the division of Persia. So Russia and Britain came to an agreement. And that agreement even allowed Russia to intervene in Persia because there was a popular uprising against the Shah, which neither Britain or Russia approved of. So they said, okay, Russia, you can intervene. So again, you see both the world being divided between the powers and the contention between them. And this contention is not just over dividing territory, but also military contention. Because while Britain was building its navy, Germany was building its navy, the other powers were all armed. And this, of course, created instability, contention in the world, which eventually erupted into war. Throughout this period, there was also a very vigorous anti-German campaign in the papers, complaining about the militarism of Germany and it needed to be stopped and so on. And obviously keeping quiet about the militarism of Britain, France and other countries. So this contention And these secret treaties continued throughout the war. It's not just something that preceded the war, they continued throughout the war as well. So in 1915, a new agreement with Russia over the division of Persia. In 1915, the secret Treaty of London with Italy. So at this time, Italy was on the other side, on the side of the Central Powers, on the side of Germany. So this was to bring Italy onto the side of the Entente, it was called, Britain and its allies. And it therefore promised secretly that, okay, well, when we dealt with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you can have bits of that. And you can also have bits of German Empire, German colonies in Africa. And you can have other bits of Africa. Somalia, you can divide up Ethiopia, you can have all of these things. So again, this is the British and French governments and Italian governments dividing the world between them, without consulting with the people there whose countries and lands they're dividing. And it gives a very clear indication of what the war was about. Not about Western civilization, not about Belgian neutrality, not about any of these things, but about a redivision of the world. And then perhaps the most infamous of all of these secret treaties, the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, wherein Britain and France essentially divided up what we call the Middle East, Western Asia. And they were concerned with, essentially, France was able to get Syria, Lebanon in its sphere of influence. Britain got Palestine. The rights of the Kurds and the Palestinians were completely ignored. And many people argue that, let's just go back a second, you're running ahead of me. Many people argue that this Sykes-Picot Agreement is the kind of root cause of the current problems that exist in Palestine and this whole area. But this is, of course, it was an agreement which reneged on previous agreements that the British government had made with the Arab peoples of that region. But these are the secret treaties that continued during the First World War, and again show very, very clearly what this war was about. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so I wanted to say something there to indicate that the causes of the war, an understanding of the war was apparent to the forces of working people of many countries, and perhaps particularly to the communists in Russia. This is an article, as you can see, pamphlet by Lenin, written in 1914, just after the war had been declared. And you can see how he explains it. And he says, yes, they've been preparing for decades. It's a struggle over markets, it's a struggle over resources. It's about the seizure of territory, the subjugation of other nations, and so on. And in fact, because this character of the war and the character of the preparations of the war were well known to many before it broke out, the socialist parties of Europe, many of them had come together and declared that if such a war broke out, they wouldn't support it. They refused to participate in it and refused to allow their members and supporters to participate in it. Of course, unfortunately, when the war did break out, many of them didn't uphold that principle, and for various reasons sided with their own governments, as it were, on the basis that they had to defend the fatherland or the motherland or whatever it was. Okay, let's go on and have a look, see what's next. So I wanted to explain something about also the period leading up to the war. I've given a kind of overview of the contention between the big powers internationally. But it's also a very important period for the struggles of the working people in Britain and in other countries. If you actually look at the period leading up to 1914, it's one of great struggle of workers struggling for their rights, of people struggling against colonialism in places like India, Egypt, and so on. And you could almost say that the war came to the aid of the governments of the big powers. It enabled them to hang on to their colonies and even to grab new colonies, and it enabled them to divert or suppress the struggles of their own people. So in Britain, in the period leading up to the war, the period is often known as the period of great unrest. It was a time of trade union struggles, workers' struggles, strikes of dockers, railwaymen, and others. This picture is actually taken from Liverpool, and it's in the midst of industrial action by the workers, and the government was forced to bring troops out. Such was the militancy of the workers in this period. And there were many other examples of this. I think this is from 1911, 1912. Of course, it's also the period of what was known as the, I guess rather ironically, the Triple Alliance between the miners, railway workers, and other transport workers, including the dockers. So the biggest unions in Britain united to fight for their rights during this period. And there was a fear in certain circles that so powerful were the workers, or you could say if the war hadn't broken out in 1914, the struggles of the workers in Britain as well as those in other countries, such as in Ireland, would have brought down the government, that brought down the whole system perhaps. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So, yeah, I thought I'd just mention that just a couple of years before war broke out, again, there was a general strike in Dublin, in Ireland. Of course, Ireland was part of Britain at that time. So a strike led by James Connolly, Jim Larkin and others, which again threatened the peace, shall we say, of the British government, and was of great concern to them. If we just go on, next slide. So this was also the time of these great struggles for the rights of women, of the suffragists and suffragettes. So again, this is a time of major political unrest, where the working people in Britain and others are fighting for a change, fighting for their rights. Okay, let's just go on to the next one. And these struggles continue during the war. And again, there are many examples of these struggles breaking out in parts of England, in Wales, and perhaps most particularly in Scotland, where, you know, we talk historically about Red Tyneside, because of the struggles of the workers, the shop stewards committees in particular, which often acted, I should say, separately from the trade union leaders and organised amongst the rank and file workers, and often in opposition to the privations of the war. The war allowed the government in Britain to bring in what was called the Defence of the Realm Act, which effectively stopped workers organising, or made it very, very difficult for workers to organise during the war. But the struggles of the workers continued against that law, which it was almost like declaring a state of emergency. So the struggles continued, and workers continued to struggle for their rights, for higher wages, for better conditions, and so on and so forth, as well as in many instances against the war itself, or against various aspects of the war itself. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, well this is slightly later. This is right at the end. I can't remember when this is. 1917? Yeah, so this is after the February Revolution in Russia. But there are many examples of meetings of this kind. There's also the Leeds Convention, which was held, which was also a gathering of trade unionists, labour leaders, socialists and others, which was calling for a general peace, opposed to the continuation of the war, and obviously in support of the Russian Revolution, which had broken out. And it's worth emphasizing again that the revolution which broke out in Russia was a direct consequence of the war. And the fact that the people of Russia were war-weary, refused to, the war, intensified all the problems that existed in Russia. The inability of people to feed themselves, the fact that people had no land to live on, all the repressive characteristics of the Tsarist government and so on were all intensified by the war. So anyway, when the revolution broke out, again it was a revolution against the repressive nature of the regime, but also a revolution against war, a revolution for peace. It had obviously a world-shattering impact, and it had that impact in Britain as well. It inspired people to realise that there was an alternative to the war, an alternative to the way the country was being governed, and that the working people in general could be the agents of change, as it were, that they could take things into their own hands and become decision makers. So this is one of those meetings. This one was held in, this is talking about the Leeds Convention, which was held in the spring, early summer of 1917. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So one of the major aspects of the opposition to the war were the conscientious objectors, who were, you could say, like an organised force of many thousands of people who refused to fight in the war because of their political principles and because they were opposed to the war, either because they were opposed to war in general or because they had political opposition and reservations to the war. You know that those who objected to the war on the basis of conscience were treated extremely badly. Some were basically sent to the front lines or sent to the war, and if they refused to fight, they were executed. Others were imprisoned and forced to do hard labour for the duration of the war. So this is one of them. This is Isaac Hall. Isaac Hall was a Jamaican conscientious objector. He was imprisoned in Wilmot Scrubs, I think. Wilmot Scrubs or Pentonville, I can't remember which now. And you can see his analysis of the war. So this is not just that he's opposed to war in general, but he says that those powers that are fighting in the war are oppressors of him and others. And he says have been amongst the worst oppressors. And as I said, he mentions Belgium, which was one of the biggest murderers of Africans in particular. So you can see there, he says, I have a moral obligation, no objection to all wars. I would sacrifice my rights for other people. So he took that stand, and although he was tortured, arrested, tortured, imprisoned, he refused to betray his principles. And there were many others, many thousands, who also took that stand. We don't hear about this opposition, the opposition of the workers, the opposition of conscientious objectors and others. This is something, again, which is hidden. And the impression that's given is that the whole country was behind the war, which is certainly not the case. In fact, quite the opposite. Okay, let's go on to the next one, please. So I also wanted to mention an example from Africa, because in Africa there were many, many rebellions against the war, which again nobody today, well, certainly the government and the media don't mention these rebellions that took place throughout the colonial empire. But in Africa there were many. One of the most famous is this one, which was led by John Chilembwe. John Chilembwe was a minister, a clergyman, in what is today Malawi in South Africa. And he led a rebellion in 1915, which was essentially a rebellion against the war, because many people in Malawi, as in other African countries, were being conscripted as porters or as auxiliaries into the war. And of course he objected. If we go to the next slide, you'll see what he says. Some of the things that he said. So he objects to Africans being recruited. He says there's nothing to do with us. Why are you conscripting us? And he led an armed rebellion for which he was executed. Today he's one of the national heroes of Malawi. Okay, so that's John Chilembo. So again, there are many, many others, but I haven't got time to talk about all of them, so I'm using him as an example. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay. So as I said, one of the most important consequences of the war was the revolution which broke out in Russia in March 1917. And here you see, I mean, this one is presented a demonstration of women. As you probably know, women were at the forefront of that revolution, most particularly the March Revolution. This is a march again against the war, for peace, and also for bread, I think, because there were lack of food and so on in Russia at that time. Okay, let's move forward a little bit, please. Next slide. Okay, so once we sometimes forget that there are really two revolutions in Russia in 1917. So the first revolution in March brought a government of anyway, a whole range of parties that were opposed to the Tsar, that wanted a democratic country. But the question was, what was that government going to do about the burning issues which confronted people, especially perhaps the key burning issue, the issue of war. And the provisional government, as it was called, not only didn't take any measures to end the war, but actually tried to pursue it more vigorously, because it was already in consult with the British and the French governments, who were encouraging it in various ways. And so that led to the second revolution, the famous October Revolution, which was led by Lenin and the Bolsheviks. And one of the key reasons for the success of the Bolsheviks, we could say, was their simple slogan, one reason: peace, bread and land. And notice that peace came first. That they said to the people of Russia, these are the things we need. We need peace, bread and land. And the only way we can get these things is by empowering ourselves. The provisional government won't bring them. We have to take things into our own hands. And of course, in Russia, they had established councils, local committees of workers and soldiers and farmers, deputies. And it was those Soviets that were able to take power in the October Revolution. And so the question of war played a big role in, if you like, persuading the working people of Russia that yes, they had to take things into their own hands and to prevent this war and to form, you could say, an anti-war government. So that's what an anti-war government meant. It had to be a government of the people's empowerment. So let's go on to the next one. So one of the first things that this new workers' government did, new Soviet government did, was to issue the decree on peace. I think just a few days into its existence, it immediately declared it for general peace and started armistice negotiations with Germany, for which it was, yeah, you can see here, 26th of October. So this is the day after, the day after the revolution. This is the decree on peace. So he said, right, we're ending the war immediately. And obviously then they had to negotiate with Germany and so on. And you probably know that Germany exacted a very harsh peace. It took a lot of Russia's territory, it took Poland, it took a massive amount of territory from Russia. But Lenin and the Bolsheviks said, well, it's better to lose this and to bring peace and to end the war and to hasten the end of the war.
and even to hold on to the territory which the Tsarist Empire previously had.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. The other thing which the new revolutionary government did was to publish the secret treaties. All the secret treaties that I mentioned earlier, they published them. And it was through the Russian government publishing these treaties that they found their way into Britain. I think the Guardian was the first newspaper in Britain, Manchester Guardian as it then was, to also publish these secret treaties. So the anti-war government in Russia was extremely important. It immediately sued for peace. It raised the prospect that this peace could be brought about by the working people themselves acting. And it immediately exposed the war, the nature of the war to everybody else. It explained what it was doing, it explained the nature of the war. So this war is a war between two groups of robbers who are dividing up the world between them. The working people of other countries shouldn't be fighting. So that was also extremely important. Okay, I can't remember what slide I've got next. Okay. So yes, well, I just said that. So this was Lenin's conclusion, because this, although it comes from a famous book, actually this was written after the war. So he's summing up the nature of the war. We couldn't get a clearer explanation of what the war was all about. Okay, let's go on, see what's next. Nothing. Okay, good. What was next? So, okay. Okay, so if we look at then what happened after the war, if we just go back, we can go back. Oh, okay. Yeah, go back to the map. I don't know whether you can find the map. Yeah, there you go. If we look, you can, yeah. So just taking Africa as an example. So what was the consequence of the war for Africa? So, as I said, millions of Africans, or hundreds of thousands of Africans who participated in the war died. Of course, some people argue that the first shots in this war were actually fired in Africa. So I think Britain declared war on the 6th of August or something like that, and the first shot in Africa was fired on the 8th, when troops from British colony of the Gold Coast invaded Togoland, which was a German colony. And in fact, there's evidence that these troops had already been mobilised. So in other words, they were ready for war even before war was declared, and were interested in grabbing these colonies. And that's exactly what happened. The victors of the war, as you can see here, these are Germany's colonies. The victors of the war then took over these colonies. So Togo was divided between Britain and France. Cameroon was divided between Britain and France. German East Africa became a British colony of Tanganyika. Southwest Africa was annexed to South Africa. So in other words, the victors of the war redivided the world, or redivided Africa, according to their interests. And I was talking in Manchester a week ago, somebody from Cameroon's, what is the date? Cameroon was in the audience, and she said, this division, because Cameroon today is one country, this division between the British and the French still has an impact on the country. The divisions that were created in 1918 still have an impact. So this, anyway, gives us an illustration of, again, what the war was about. Similar divisions took place over the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, particularly in Europe. They were divided up between victors, and of course they're already identified or indicated in Western Asia, and what we call the Middle East. Again, that division was made, and the victors, British and France, got the spoils. Well, there are all sorts of other things that could be said about the end of the war, but essentially the end of the war redivided the world and created new problems. It created the beginnings, if you like, of the Second World War. Of course, the big powers carried on their wars. Britain, particularly in regard to Ireland, where there was intervention to prevent the Irish people exercising their right to self-determination. Of course, that's an interesting phrase, because at the end of the First World War, the term self-determination was what was bandied about, particularly by the American president. But in fact, the First World War had nothing to do with self-determination. It had nothing to do with the self-determination of the people of Ireland, or the people of Africa, or the people of Asia, or the people of the Middle East at all. So their rights were denied. The big powers were the victors, in one sense, but at the same time the war had demonstrated the possibility to the working people of significant change. So not only there are revolutions in Russia, there's revolutions in Germany, there's attempted revolutions in other countries as well, throughout Europe in this period. So the war to end all wars, as it's called, did not resolve any of the problems, contention, or major issues which existed before the war. Quite the opposite. It created the conditions for new problems and new wars. So I think when we look at exactly what was going on, both the contention between the big powers and the struggles of the working people in this period, there are very definite conclusions that we can draw. Excuse me. Very definite conclusions that we can draw. Because today, the world is similarly a place which is extremely unstable, where there's contention between the big powers. In Africa, in Central Asia, in the Middle East. There's, again, massive preparations for war. We were discussing outside, the armaments industry, the export of arms, particularly from Britain to other countries. So again, the world is a very unstable place. And just as the First World War showed that the struggles of the working people, which could be that could be crucial to bringing peace, if not globally, certainly for one very, very important country. So that indicates something to us, if you like, or lessons of history are being presented to us. And I think it's important that we learn those lessons. That in this uncertain, unstable world, the struggles of ordinary people, and especially this idea, this conception that we can usher in an anti-war government of our own, that they become extremely, extremely important. So anyway, I'd like to close with that. So I hope I haven't spoken for too long, but anyway, I just wanted to outline some of the maybe hidden aspects of the war, which I thought it might be useful to discuss. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Frank, for that. Right, I'll now open it for any questions or contributions from the floor.
Could I just ask, do you see any parallels between the tensions before the First World War and the tensions in the world today?
Yes.
would you careful that word, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, they exist almost everywhere. It would just we take Africa as an example. So that division which I showed on the map, that's usually, in historical terms, is seen as being a result of what was called the Scramble for Africa, which took place in the last quarter of the 19th century. So all the big powers were contending for territory, for resources, for markets and so on. And today people talk about a new scramble for Africa, because all the big powers are contending there. Britain, France, China, the BRICS countries and so on, in various ways. For, Africa presents itself as a great new market, a very youthful market. It has unlimited resources and so on. So that contention exists. We often get misleading information about it. For example, we all have mobile phones and so on. So the minerals which go into these mobile phones, many of them come from Africa. Things like cobalt and coltan and these kinds of things. Many of them come from the region of the Congo. And in the Congo, I mentioned that in the period just before the First World War, there'd been, under Belgian colonial rule, under the rule of the Belgian King Leopold, there'd been about 10 million Africans who lost their lives. So in the recent period, since the 1990s, there's been another major conflict in the Congo, where probably another 10 million Africans have died. That conflict is often presented as a conflict between African countries and so on. But if you look behind that, you find all the big multinational companies are contending, are arming people and so on. So that, anyway, that's an example, just an example of that contention. But we see it elsewhere. We see it in what's called the Middle East. We see it over Syria in particular now. We're seeing contention over Yemen. We see it in North Africa and Libya and so on. So that contention exists. At the same time, the big powers act also in a slightly different way, in that they often intervene just to destroy things, just to smash things and create chaos. So in many ways, the situation is, you could say, even more dangerous now than it was in the period leading up to the First World War. And obviously the big powers are much more powerful, have all kinds of weapons of mass destruction and so on. So I think that what we call the imperialist system of states, the fact that we have a world which is where the big powers contend in that way, that creates all the conditions for these problems to break out. But then the other thing is that we're in a different position in that we have the experience of the 20th century, the experience of working people struggling to change things. And we know from that history that there's a possibility of doing that. So I think that the situation is unstable and so on. But we have all that experience to learn from and to be able to put into practice to make sure that it doesn't lead to World War III.
Thank you.
You said that one of the lessons that we could maybe learn from the First World War and looking at the situation now is that we can usher in we can usher in anti-war governments of our own, which would be great. But one of the things that you see when you look back at the First World War, apart from maybe in Russia, we know what happened subsequently there, is that the people and the struggles that were there seemed to get overtaken by the war. There were some continued outbreaks of struggle, but nothing was achieved. Women, certainly in the suffrage movement, gave up the idea of fighting for the vote as soon as the war was declared, for whatever reason that was. So how do we solve the problem of the propaganda that gets put out by governments who are supporting the war, or the warlike situations that we have now? How do we get beyond that? How do we get those people who are anti-war to actually believe that they can overcome things when they are actually in the minority in terms of numbers?
I would think probably the majority, I would have thought. I mean, I think that perhaps without going too much into history, I mean, I did mention that you could say the confusion that was created because some of the leaders of Labour Party, for example, at that time, some of the trade union leaders and so on, they went back on their principles, as it were. So that obviously created confusion. So in other words, you've not just got the propaganda of Lord Kitchener saying your country needs you, but you've got whoever it might be saying, well, this is a war, so on. So that was the kind of problem that existed then. However, as I explained, people went on. It's not as if things stopped, as if those struggles stopped, because they carried on throughout the war in various ways. So I think now, I mean, those who have organised this meeting are the agents of doing all these things. So it kind of starts here. How do we do it? Well, this is part of doing it. Having meetings like this where we discuss things, where we maybe look at experience, because this is just history, but it's just our experience of us and our ancestors and so on. And to continually explain these things to people and to organise amongst them and with them on all of these questions. So, as Leila was saying, it's not like we're waiting until World War III breaks out, because the conditions are there now. So to take a stand over Yemen, to take a stand over Syria, or to take a stand over Libya, or whatever it might be, it's important that we organise on all of these issues now. Again, without any illusions. Again, if one looks back to the First World War, what it shows is that it's like the people have to keep the initiative in their own hands, not give it away to anybody else. So to have, again, organisations like the one that's organising this meeting, that continues to organise, that continues. So then when, if the situation escalates or gets worse, it's in a position to have an even greater influence. I think to me that's the thing, to keep the initiative, to keep organising, to keep explaining, because a lot of these things, even on a day-to-day basis, need explaining what's going on, because a lot of confusion is created about what's happening now, but also what happened in the past. And there are attempts to present war as something glorious or necessary in various circumstances, and so on. And obviously there are instances where war maybe, your country's invaded, maybe you have to defend it. So, but that was certainly not the case in 1914.
Thank you.
Anyone else wants to ask a question?
When you mentioned the anti-German press, do you think there's an anti-Russian press now? I'm thinking of when America and France and England won the bomb, Syria won the supposedly what needs to happen with people.
Yeah, I mean, there does seem to be, I mean, not only from the point of view of what America does, but also what happens here. You know, I think we're all aware of the various incidents. I think what's important about that is what kind of lies behind it, so what else is going on. So I think one thing is that Russia is always presented as the aggressor, as it were. Whereas if you look at the way that NATO operates, if you were Russia, you'd think you were being encircled, certainly by being surrounded by NATO. And the manoeuvres that NATO carries out in the Baltic states and Lithuania and so on, the troops that are stationed throughout Eastern Europe. So I think that the propaganda that you're referring to is connected with, you know, you could say actual war preparations that are going on now, exercises that are going on. And, you know, again, that's very, very dangerous. You know, that if people are made to think that Russia or any other country is, in particular, is their enemy, it may be that the government of Britain and those it represents are in contention with Russia or in contention with China or wherever. But that doesn't mean that the people of Britain should line up behind their government, whether it's preparations for war or any other contention. So yeah, I think it's important. And again, going back to the last question, you know, those of us who are aware of these things then have a responsibility as well to explain things to other people, to combat these things with evidence, with facts, to be organising amongst people as best we can. So,
Okay, thank you for that.